Our final speaker for the morning session, we're running a few minutes late, but I think we'll crib that at lunch rather than morning tea. We'll give you a full half hour. The final speaker is David Lowe, who is an organic winemaker from Mudgee. Please give him a warm welcome. Slow farming in a hurry, David Lowe.
Thank you very much for letting me speak. I'll get straight onto it because we're short of time. And the way I'm going to deal with this speech is four sections: the land in crisis, explaining the situation that I was faced with, how we went about helping and revigorate the problems that we found. Some of the results are not always good, but to be an honest and open response to what we did and took. And if there's time, obviously the next steps that we want to undertake. So the first part we had in 2000, year 2000, my sister and I did what any loving kids would do of our loving, doting parents was with the farm. We put him in a nursing home. And as my son reminds me every time I repeat myself, I might be in the same process. We then, luckily or fortunately, arranged succession planning, and then I ended up with the farm, and she got the cash, never mind. I'm not sure I was the right person, but at the time I thought I was the right person to carry on with the farm. And the farm was about 1,000 acres, settled by my family in 1823, so it's been a succession of bad management that I ended up with probably the worst position I could possibly be, but most enthusiasm that I've ever had. And the problems were a number. The first, of course, as we've seen before, erosion. This was overgrazing, overstocking, and major problems with the sheet erosion. And my parents were terrific, but they were really heavily involved with soil conservation. My father, from 1947, coming back from the war, dug most of the trenches to slow the velocity of water by hand, pick and shovel. And then in 1965, with Soil Conservation Service got bigger and got a tractor and a bulldozer and made some big erosion, big gullies, or to say water gullies. And he did the best he could, but of course this was a big problem that started in the big gully started in 1873 when they took the clay to build the bricks for our house, and that's in a major erosion gully that we're trying to fix up now. The second problem was weed domination. We probably held the world record for saffron thistles on a farm. They were so bad that my father had to slash with a little Massey TA20, a 20 horsepower tractor. We'd slash walkways for the cattle to walk down to get water to drink because they couldn't move. We couldn't go anywhere with it. It was so bad with saffron thistles that there was absolutely no way the stock could survive or proliferate. And the third part was my wife, or ex-wife at the time, was talking about, was called cattle chaos, and she described it as a Darwinian problem of natural selection, so that when my father had hip replacements and both knees damaged, and my mother had dementia, and in 2000 when we took over the farm there was about 500 head of cattle, and they'd been for 3 years interbreeding amongst themselves, and as my wife pointed out, that the way that my father would get money was select the ones that were most docile and sell them to the market. So what we had left was more to do with Spain, really, than anything else. Was about 500 of the angriest Angus cattle you'd ever see. And in fact, in the end, we found the only way to get them into the paddock was to stand in front of the gate, and they'd charge you. You would definitely move to the side with not even a red blanket and shut the gate after you. In fact, we got to the last three and we had to shoot them because we just couldn't get any close to them. So we decided then that cattle wasn't our bag at the time. And so the plan to revigorate was about destocking. So we sold everything, every cow that we could muster, and shot the last three, and left the place barren for about 3 years. And we could do that because we'd set up a winery. We'd put a vineyard in 1995, built a winery in 2000. So that allowed us to I guess, fortify our defences by having some off-farm income. We undertook a land audit, which was basically to find out what we had, and I'll come to that in a minute, what the sort of analysis we did. My wife was a vet, so she was quite technical. I was a winemaker trained in Adelaide and spent time in the Hunter Valley and in Europe, and came back to the chaos of the farm, but the love of it, because I was born there. And then we had to obviously think of how we could change the practices, because what we had before, although we got a massive income from selling 497 actually, wild Angus cattle, we needed to do the things that were differently than we'd actually inherited. And of course, lastly, remain solvent, because it's all very well to sell all your stock, but then with no income coming from the farm, we needed to obviously make sure that the business could carry on. It's no good us going broke and with great principles, and our next door neighbours who were rapacious billionaires buy the farm and turn it back to something that we didn't intend it to be. I am surrounded by 3 billionaires, by the way, as my Rabobank manager at the time reminded me. It'd be okay, it's great having billionaires, David. If you go broke, we'll be able to sell the place really quickly. Very funny bank manager, but a good friend. So the results, the first thing with soil and salinity, we basically measured the whole farm, and the farm is basically lined up here, but we took electrical conductivity measures, which is a disc behind a ute around the whole farm, and established the levels of the type of soil and any salt issues or any salt pans, and that gave us a bit of an idea where our best productivity and where our energy should lie. Well, I'd been told years ago that with farming you should work on your most productive land first. It's going to give you the quickest bang for the buck, and come back to the less fertile ones later on. So we identified the areas that we think we needed to do. We had a best opportunity of growing something. At that stage the vineyard was 10 acres and the farm was about 990, so there was quite a lot of land that we had idle at that time, but having no stock on it allowed us to do something about it. Then we looked at a plan. The property is called Tinger, and we looked at a plan, and the outline of the farm is the red line around it, and we, for diverse reasons, we had about 20% of the land was virgin country with white box woodland and a GOFRA, and we received a grant from the association previous to Local Land Services. It might have been Landcare, I'm not sure, there's that many changes in names, but we managed to get a grant that, and there were a few of them around in 2003, that they would provide money for fencing, so we re-fenced the major parts of the farm, and allowed us, we had to pay for the fencing, and allowed us to then set these areas aside for 14 years, which we did. So in 2000, we set about 25% of the farm aside from any stock by proper fencing. There was no fencing before. The fencing was traditionally for fat lambs, and that was okay. There was never any barbed wire. It was always just to a 4mm wire. And of course, when we went to cattle, of course, my father couldn't catch sheep anymore because his legs were bad. So we got cattle, and of course, they used to go from one paddock to the other by leaning against the fence and falling into it. So we had really no fences that were any good. That was the type of management they did, and they survived. They were depression people. They didn't spend any money, and they just fixed things. And good on them, they managed to keep the farm, but there was no money on infrastructure. So that gave us an idea. And also, none of these fence lines that was designed had anything to do with the existing fence lines, and that's been one of the previous speakers spoke about that the fence lines before were more for convenience. So we started to redesign fence lines according to terrain, contour, and pasture. And of course, we probably didn't need to, in hindsight, go to this expense of getting all this analysis. But although I was born on the farm, I didn't have much knowledge of it. And people who've been on the farm a long time know exactly what the type of pasture is and the best way to separate different pastures and land uses by fencing. We hadn't done that, so we blindly followed these plans as much as possible. There was room for crash grazing in that as well, which we've undertaken. There's another one, I've double duplicated, whoops. So biodiversity. We've looked at, and here's a shot in 2006 where we actually got rid of all the saffrons by getting rid of all the stock, and we bought a pasture cropper. Colin Sice advises on that. It's a massive slash, about 14 foot wide, and every time the saffrons come up, we'd cut the heads off. Use a lot of fuel, but we also allowed us to continue on our organic management. In 2003, we sought organic certification, which we achieved in 2006. So there's a paddock line. This is a vineyard in here, and there's a fence line, but this basically shows you that some native grasses have come back and basically outgrown the saffron thistle, so we've pretty well got that beaten. We get the odd saffron thistle now, and we're quick to seize on it when we go and crash graze it to slash it off, the head off, when they're about to go into flower in about 10 days' time, so we'll be ready to take the tops off those saffron thistles. They were incredible. Saffron, what a great crop. What a shame that you don't get real saffron off saffron thistles, because I wouldn't be here today now. I'd be somewhere else. And then the shot of it next to us, our grapevines. So we changed the way we grew grapevines. We don't irrigate our grapevines. We don't trellis them. They're called a bush vine, and we have a lot of grasses and native grasses grow around them. And I'll talk about that briefly before I finish. Compost. So we had a lot of stuff on the place. We worked with Elaine Ingham, went to some conferences, and we decided to make our own fertiliser. So part of the organic process is we now make about 2,500 tonnes of compost on the farm a year. We use grape skins, are about 15% of it. The white grapes are very sweet and lots of sugar, and red grapes have got lots of alcohol and lots of N and carbon. We supplement it with all the cardboard and all the paper from the winery, which is a lot. And we use the manure from the sale yards in Mudgee. We use the straw from the showground when we can, and the rice hulls from the racecourse. So we pay nothing for it, we freight it. We also use grapevine cuttings, we shred, and all the water from the winery we collect in the dam, and we use that to irrigate it. You'll see some crude pipe on the top where we irrigate it. It's not perfect. We did bought up by an Aeromaster compost turner, but we sold it after 2 years because it was so expensive to run that we had to sell all the compost to pay for the lease of the equipment. So we think after 3 years we ended up with 1 tonne of compost, which was good for the garden. So this stuff isn't perfect, but we've got a lot of it, so we do an assay every year, and we'll get an assay. We use EAL for that, which tells us basically the cations and some of the things, NP and K, that we need. And for grapevines, we've now worked out what we harvest each year in tonnes of fruit. We measure the calcium, magnesium, sodium, or we get an assay of that, and we replenish it to a factor of 2 to what we lose in fruit. We add back with the compost. So if we might need 1.5 tonne of compost to replenish what we've taken out with fruit harvest, we put 3 tonne on. So we're putting 5 to 6 tonne per hectare of compost on all the vineyard, and we're doing about 100 hectares now around the farm. In 2011, we also undertook biodynamic work, and we used a consultant mentioned before, Hamish Mackay, to help us with biodynamics. And that's, with all the other things, that's been a real leap of us in I think in quality mostly, which is better for us from a profit point of view. We're paid for quality, not for productivity, back to your point. Here's a crop performance. Now, I did this the other day because we don't irrigate our vineyards, and these bar charts are our 2 varieties. The brown one is our Shiraz vineyard, and the purple one's our Zinfandel vineyard. You'll see through the years, and on the line graph is actually, the line mark is the rainfall for that year. And of course, rainfall is an annual. It depends when it comes, but what we've been able to work out is 2 things. Either rainfall isn't as important as we thought rainfall or water isn't as important as we thought it was, or we've done other things to actually improve our productivity, less dependent on rainfall. And the last 3 after 2015 crop, disastrous crop, because we don't irrigate. We changed the way we manage the farm, particularly with vineyards, as we grow our organic matter in the winter time, and we keep it weed free. We do cultivate, yes. We don't cultivate the Shiraz vineyard because the roots are 5 metres deep, because they're benign with the grass, and grass cover is not a problem. Deep rooted are great, they just live below it. But the Zinfandel varieties are only 0.5 metre root system, so they are outcompeted by grass, so we do cultivate that. But we've lifted our organic matter in 12 years from 1.8 to 4.8%. We've lifted enormously by growing that organic matter in autumn. And this is the lesson I've learned, is that biodynamics has taught me, is about timing. Not so much about, I love the preparations, but the timing is everything. So we're we will harvest grapes, and then a day later we'll start to plant our winter crops in. So we'll get them up. We'll have our crops up to about 0.5 metre by end of May, and that's when there's early autumn rain. We go very quickly to get their growth up, and that organic matter is vital through the winter time when the vines are dormant, and we plough back in. And now any rainfall we've had is incredibly useful, and that's going to drive our moisture for the rest of the year. If we don't get any more rain the rest of the year, that won't matter. The great Mediterranean vineyard areas get rainfall in winter and dry summers, so we're quite happy to live in that environment for grapevines. So what we then said, well, we started to become in the tourism entertainment business because 3 minutes, right? So we developed a tourism process where we have a farm walk around about a quarter of the farm, and we have different crops. We have nut orchards and fruit orchards, and we have feijoas and donkeys, and the restaurant next door, which is my wife's Hatted restaurant, which helps, of course. But we have a diverse place where people come and visit, and they can give their thanks by buying my expensive wine. Marketing opportunities. We've developed a cellar door, and the chart shows you the growth from 2010 by month as we've increased our opportunity with tourism. So these are sales at cellar door. So we've basically a factor of eight times since 2010 our cellar door. So we are 90% of our wine is now sold at the cellar door. We are now price setters. We're not price takers. Anybody who's in agriculture has this nightmare. Bad nights every now and then where you know that whatever you take to the market, you're at the whim of someone else buying it from you. In this case, we set our own price, and we market and sell very clearly to the public, who are most interested in the fact that it's authentic, it's real, it's organic, and all those things that matter. Authenticity is critical for us, and we also provide a quality beverage that people are happy to have in moderation. We say drink less and drink better. You can't afford to get pissed on my wine. So I just wanted to finish off by saying that we're an example. We managed to steer where the effect of the farm was in 2000 was just sheep and cattle, or probably racehorses in the 19th century. We've had to change and modify. We've used our opportunities, which is that close to town we have good water, but we seldom use our water. We have a good water licence, and it's 120 megalitres, and we use 8 megalitres a year. So we actually don't need all that water. We've changed the way we focus with water. We think water's critical. We think that we've got it with our pasture management. It's about managing cattle with less productivity and higher price. The challenge for me is to get the price for beef and lamb organically when the market is so clearly set against small producers. When we looked at organics, they said if you produce 100 a week, we'll talk to you. We might only run 100, 200 head a year. So we need to be more boutique about how we sell our market produce. So the future for me is to add to umbrella market the products that we can grow. Not just grapes, not wine. We've now got a hemp licence through organic hemp oil will be our big opportunity. Other things that are subsidiary to sell in a retail sense or online. Thank you for your attention.
Just hanging for a quick question. Very good, very good. Couple of quick questions before we duck to morning tea. Do you think you need to lock out paddocks for 14 years to improve a farm? Would you do that again?
We did that because we wanted to build a lot of the trees back. So we wanted to get our shade back. We found that our place had very little shade, and we noticed, so the answer to that was my wife noticed that when the cattle were grazing on paddocks, they'd always go back to the paddocks where most of the trees were. And most of the trees were providing shade, and the diverse grasses were all native grasses. They found that monoculture wasn't a good thing to digest, pasture improved. They preferred to go back in the shade. So we figured cattle needed to have more shade environment. I don't think it needed to be 14 years, but I think it was at least 5 years to allow proliferate of native grasses and to get the cattle off it, because they were selectively grazing all the good stuff.
Why did you go organic?
I wanted to make better wine. So in 1979, I worked for one of the great wine people of the world called Len Evans. And as a 21-year-old winemaker thinking he knew everything, The day two, he and my other boss, Murray Tyrrell, bought me the best 20 wines in the world and said, A, make them, and B, at least know what they good and taste like. So we tried the best 20 wines in the world, and I'm sure they wanted to drink them after hours, but I went through the notions of the best 20, and 9 of those 20 were organic, Demeter or Biologique, and they were international wines they had $1,000 a bottle at that point in 1979. So I asked what was the relationship between quality and organics, biodynamics. They weren't quite sure, but these are people who've been practicing it for hundreds of years. They were our peers, the world leaders. So I asked, why can't we do the same on the property I worked for? They said, no, it's too risky, no one knows anything about it. So when I had my own place, I wanted to do it, to push for quality. With quality, I'm more proud to sell my produce if I've got great quality. It's easier, it's obvious to the customer.
Very good. Thank you very much, David. That's fantastic.